Solid evidences show the dark side of Elvis Presley. Did you know that once he pulled a handgun whenever a stranger approached the booth? We'll uncover that chilling incident in just a bit. Right now, there's much more to cover. From his fatal prescription drug dependency and the scandal of his underage romance, to the debate over his appropriation of black music and his pattern of shocking outbursts, we'll explore the dark side of the king of rock and roll. Stay tuned. On August 16, 1977, Elvis Presley was found unresponsive in the bathroom of his Graceland mansion. His fiancée, Ginger Alden, discovered him around 2:30 p.m., and by the time emergency personnel arrived, he was already gone. An initial news conference that evening declared cardiac arrhythmia as the cause of death, with medical examiner Dr. Jerry Francisco insisting drugs played no role. Yet this conclusion, announced prematurely by Francisco without consensus from the full pathology team, sowed immediate doubt among doctors who had conducted the autopsy under Drive E. Eric Muirhead's supervision. Muirhead and his colleagues noted evidence of chronic illness, diabetes, glaucoma, severe constipation, and signs of long-term drug use, but they refrained from drawing a final verdict until toxicology results could confirm their suspicions. Weeks later, exhaustive toxicology tests painted a starkly different picture. The report revealed high levels of pharmaceutical painkillers and sedatives in Presley's system, specifically dilaudid, hydromorphone, methaqualone, Quaalude, Percodan, oxycodone plus aspirin, Demerol, meperidine, and codeine. These were all legally prescribed medications, yet in quantities far exceeding therapeutic norms. The Tennessee Board of Health immediately opened an inquiry into Presley's personal physician, Dr. George C. Nichopoulos, launching proceedings that would ultimately expose years of aggressive overprescribing. The autopsy and subsequent investigations confirmed that Presley had no illegal narcotics, no heroin, cocaine, or other street drugs in his body. Instead, at least 8 different prescription medications were identified, each a central nervous system depressant with profound potential for addiction and respiratory suppression. Among the key substances were codeine and morphine, 2 opiate analgesics used for moderate to severe pain, methaqualone, Quaalude, and diazepam, Valium, sedatives prescribed for insomnia and anxiety, ethinomate, Valmid, and ethchlorvanol, Placidil, hypnotics no longer commonly used due to safety concerns, pentobarbital, phenobarbital, and butabarbital, barbiturates once standard for sleep disorders and seizure control. The presence of this perfect prescription for an early death underscores the lethal risks of polypharmacy, even when each drug is legal when taken alone. In Presley's body, the combined sedative effects likely led to profound respiratory depression, slowed heart rate, and eventual cardiac arrest. Indeed, the amount of codeine detected was measured at more than 30 times the recommended dosage, demonstrating how easily therapeutic intent can slip into fatal overdose. Presley's dependence on prescription drugs was not a sudden development. His health had been in decline for years, with chronic back pain, arthritis, and other ailments prompting repeated medical interventions. As early as 1973, he was hospitalized for pethidine, meperidine, addiction, and suffered 2 barbiturate overdoses that same year. These episodes foreshadowed the growing toll that long-term medication use would exact on his body and mind. At the center of Presley's medical regime stood Dr. George C. Nichopoulos, known affectionately as Dr. Nick. A Vanderbilt-trained physician, Nichopoulos became Presley's primary doctor in 1970, initially treating complaints as mundane as saddle sores. Over time, however, his role evolved into that of an enabler, writing prescription after prescription to manage both Presley's genuine ailments and his mounting cravings. By early 1977, the scale of prescribing had reached staggering proportions. In the first 8 months of that year alone, Nichopoulos issued more than 10,000 doses of amphetamines, barbiturates, narcotics, tranquilizers, sleeping pills, laxatives, and hormones in Elvis's name. This torrent of medications reflected an escalating pattern. Whenever one prescriber balked, another would step in, ensuring Presley's demands were met. Nichopoulos later testified that he had even devised a scheme of placebos, hundreds of dummy pills, to wean Presley off excessive medication. He maintained that his intent was to protect Elvis from street drugs by keeping him supplied with doctor-regulated prescriptions. The jury at his 1980 criminal trial accepted this defense, acquitting him of negligence and murder charges brought after Presley's death. Critics, however, viewed his actions as quintessential malpractice, the substitution of sound medical judgment with a ceaseless dispensing of addictive substances. Despite his acquittal, Nicopoulos's professional standing would not survive unscathed. The Tennessee Board of Medical Examiners suspended his license for 3 months in 1980, placing him on probation for the following 3 years. However, it was not until 1995, 18 years after Presley's death, that the board permanently revoked his medical credentials. The ruling cited years of overprescribing and branded him a Dr. Feelgood, a moniker that underscored the era's shift toward recognizing and punishing pill mills and physician-facilitated addiction. Elvis Presley's tragic end serves as a vivid case study in the dangers of prescription drug dependency and medical malpractice. His autopsy offers incontrovertible proof that legal medications, when misused or overprescribed, can be every bit as deadly as illicit substances. Dr. Nick's willingness to supply mountains of addictive drugs in the name of patient care highlights the critical need for stringent oversight, ethical restraint, and a holistic approach to pain management, lessons that resonate in today's ongoing opioid and sedative misuse crises. On a humid summer evening in September 1959, 14-year-old Priscilla Beaulieu attended a party on the U.S. Army base in Bad Nauheim, West Germany, where Elvis Presley was stationed during his military service. She had heard of the young private's sudden ascent to fame back home in America, but she was unprepared for the magnetic pull he exercised the moment he entered the room. Tall, handsome, and brimming with charisma, Elvis bowed courteously, greeted her with a soft, "Hi, little lady," and within minutes was dancing with her to the gentle strains of his favorite ballads. By the end of the evening, he had asked her for her address, and soon began sending letters and mixtapes across the ocean. That initial spark ignited a relationship defined by extraordinary privilege and deep imbalance. Priscilla, the only daughter of an Air Force officer, was living a sheltered life of ballet lessons, debutante preparations, and school dances. Elvis, a global superstar adored by millions, moved in a world of private jets, extravagant recording studios, and adoring fans who shrieked at his every appearance. He wrote her letters filled with declarations of undying love and curt instructions on how to dress, how to hold herself, and how to guard her reputation. Although she was too young to fully grasp the implications, Priscilla felt special, hand-picked by the king himself, but also increasingly aware that her childhood was slipping away. When Elvis shipped back to the United States in early 1960, their correspondence continued unabated. He chided her gently for missing a letter or for spending time with friends instead of writing to him. He sent lavish gifts, jewelry, records, designer clothes, and arranged for her to attend a boarding school in Switzerland, ostensibly so she could continue her education but more so to ensure she was always within reach of his watchful entourage. At age 16, Priscilla's classes in Lausanne were punctuated by calls from Elvis demanding updates on her grades, her health, and her social life. He expected absolute honesty and total devotion. In the spring of 1963, Priscilla's father granted her permission to relocate to Memphis, Tennessee, so she could live under Elvis's roof and finish high school. At 17, she moved into Graceland, a sprawling mansion that pulsed with the constant comings and goings of musicians, filmmakers, and the occasional Hollywood star. Although the home was luxurious, it felt claustrophobic, every corner monitored by security cameras, every visitor vetted by Elvis's entourage, every outing scheduled by his assistants. Priscilla slept on a sofa in the den rather than in a private bedroom, a reminder that she was to be kept under close observation. If she ventured out without his approval, she risked a stern rebuke and a week of icy silence. Their courtship stretched on for 8 years before Elvis finally proposed in December 1966, when Priscilla was 21 and he was 32. The engagement, announced with much fanfare, masked the years of manipulation that had shaped their bond. Friends of the couple describe Elvis as often domineering, insisting that Priscilla change her hairstyle, lose weight, or wear only the outfits he selected for her. He demanded fidelity even as his own infidelities multiplied. While on film sets, he was notorious for pursuing young actresses or calling women to his trailer late at night under the guise of discussing wardrobe fittings or script changes. Their wedding, held at Graceland on May 1, 1967, was an intimate affair with only a handful of guests. Priscilla wore an ivory silk gown that she had helped design. Elvis donned a crisp tuxedo. Despite the veneer of romance, the marriage was soon plagued by the same controlling dynamics that had defined their courtship. Priscilla felt isolated from her family, her parents still living on base in Germany, and from any friends who did not receive Elvis's personal approval. He managed her finances, refused her requests for unsupervised travel, and insisted on attending every social engagement, even those organized for her high school reunion. Behind closed doors, the The relationship was further strained by Elvis's growing dependence on prescription medications. Priscilla became both witness and unwitting participant as Elvis's personal physician funneled pills into the household, sleeping tablets, sedatives, painkillers, ostensibly to manage his chronic back pain and insomnia. At first, she believed these drugs were harmless when prescribed by a trusted doctor. Later, she realized they fueled his erratic moods, his unpredictable outbursts, and his increasing isolation. She learned to tread lightly, knowing that a misplaced word or a hesitated reply could trigger a tirade fueled by paranoia and pill-induced spikes of anger. In 1968, the couple welcomed their only child, Lisa Marie Presley. For Priscilla, motherhood offered a new role but also amplified the pressures of living under Elvis's domineering influence. She bore the physical and emotional toll of pregnancy largely alone, with Elvis dipping in and out of Graceland as work obligations and personal indulgences dictated. After Lisa Marie's birth, Priscilla's days were consumed by nursing schedules, nightly feedings, and the ceaseless demands of caring for an infant. Yet she remained under Elvis's watchful eye, questioned on her parenting decisions and critiqued for her appearance and weight gain. As Lisa Marie grew, from a cooing infant into a curious toddler, Priscilla pressed Elvis for a more stable family life, a more structured schedule, and fewer late-night parties and visits. Each plea for normalcy was met with excuses: touring schedules, film commitments, or claims that Lisa Marie needed to be seen with her father at press events. Priscilla's own needs were secondary, her voice subdued by the sheer force of Elvis's star power. In private moments, she confessed to friends that she often felt like a teenager hiding a secret life rather than a grown woman married to the most famous entertainer on the planet. By the early 1970s, cracks in their marriage had widened into chasms. Priscilla discovered, through overheard phone calls and whispered conversations, that Elvis had taken numerous lovers, some casual encounters, others more serious liaisons with women he found on tour. His substance-fueled haze made him emotionally unavailable, prone to bouts of depression and rage that left Priscilla exhausted and fearful. She sought counsel from family members and fellow military spouses, all of whom urged her to consider separation for her own well-being. In February 1972, Priscilla moved out of Graceland with Lisa Marie, initially visiting twice a week to maintain appearances. The separation, though heart-wrenching, offered her a glimpse of life beyond Elvis's shadow. She enrolled in speech therapy classes, reconnected with old friends, and began writing her memoirs as a way to process years of manipulation and control. The divorce was finalized in October 1973, with a settlement that granted Priscilla custody of Lisa Marie and a generous financial stipend. She walked away not only from the marriage but from a relationship that had defined her formative years, reclaiming her autonomy and setting the stage for her own career in business and philanthropy. Looking back, Priscilla has described her years with Elvis as a mixture of fairy tale moments and grim reality checks. The young girl who fell under his spell at 14 emerged as a woman who recognized the perils of power unmoored from responsibility. Their story remains a cautionary tale of grooming and imbalance. A superstar who, despite his genuine affection, imposed a gilded cage on the woman he claimed to love. Priscilla's survival and eventual success speaks to her resilience and her refusal to let the dark side of that relationship define her future. On a sweltering afternoon in July 1954, Sam Phillips of Sun Studio in Memphis pressed the record button and watched as a lanky 18-year-old white kid poured his heart into a song by black bluesman Arthur Crudup. That voice, part country twang, part gospel cry, sent "That's All Right" shooting up the local charts. Listeners heard something new, a thrilling fusion of rhythm and blues, country, and gospel. But what many didn't know was that the track was, at its core, a reinterpretation of black musical traditions born in juke joints and church pews across the South. Elvis Presley's meteoric rise depended on that very fusion. He drew from the gospel quartets of his youth, soaked in the Delta blues that drifted from jukeboxes, and absorbed the extroverted showmanship of black performers like B.B. King, Little Richard, and Sister Rosetta Tharpe. In his early concerts, he openly credited these artists as his inspirations, thanking Arthur, "Big Boy," Crudup on air after covering "That's All Right," and later acknowledging the rhythmic fire of Little Richard in interviews. Yet as Elvis's fame exploded, black originators often saw their records fall silent on the airwaves while Presley's covers dominated Billboard's pop charts. Major labels smelled gold in this formula. RCA Victor signed Elvis in late 1955 and swiftly began releasing singles that repackaged R&B hits for white teenagers. Hound Dog, originally recorded by Big Mama Thornton in 1952, became Elvis's signature smash in 1956, but Thornton's raw, guttural growl gave way to Presley's polished swagger. While Thornton struggled to earn royalties, Elvis earned a royalty check every week. This pattern repeated across dozens of songs: Blue Suede Shoes, Carl Perkins; Baby, What You Want Me to Do, Jimmy Reed; and Lawdy Miss Clawdy, Lloyd Price, among others. Critics in black communities voiced their displeasure. In the late 1980s, Chuck D of Public Enemy called Presley a straight-up racist who stole black music and made millions while the original artists got crumbs. Scholars have pointed out that Presley's success rested on an industry that denied black musicians access to mainstream radio and television, ensuring that white audiences associated rock and roll with a white face. Many black artists watched as their work was sanitized, string sections added, vocal growls muted, and sold back to them at a markup they could not afford. Yet the story is more complex than simple theft. Those same black musicians often spoke of admiration for Presley's talent and generosity. B.B. King, whose fluid guitar lines shaped Presley's early style, maintained that Elvis had heart and respect for the music that inspired him. King noted that Presley's success opened doors. When Elvis performed on national television, R&B songs gained exposure they had never before enjoyed on popular broadcasts. Ray Charles, who initially bristled at the appropriation of his material, later remarked that Presley's crossover appeal helped pave the way for integrated audiences. Within that tension lies the heart of the racial critique. Elvis's embodiment of black music highlighted the segregation of 1950s America. White teenagers could dance wildly to rhythm and blues on stage without fear of arrest, but black performers risked police brutality for the same moves. When Elvis gyrated on The Ed Sullivan Show in 1956, Southern governors denounced him as immoral. But when Little Richard made similar moves, local sheriffs often barred him from venues or threatened concertgoers with arrest. Biographers have uncovered whispers of Presley's own discomfort with segregation. He quietly befriended black musicians on tour, inviting James Brown and his band to stay at Graceland in the late 1960s, and once defied a Tennessee hotel's whites-only policy to play a late-night jam session. Yet there is no record of Presley publicly challenging Jim Crow laws. He never used his platform to advocate for civil rights. For many critics, that silence spoke louder than any quiet gesture behind the scenes. The debate intensified in the 1980s and 1990s as hip-hop artists sampled Presley's records even as they decried his legacy. Chuck D revisited his claims in Public Enemy's liner notes, while pioneering producer Rick Rubin argued that rock's appropriation of black music was part of a long lineage of cultural exchange, one in which power and profit, however unequally distributed, were inseparable from the art itself. Rubin pointed out that many black artists, from Muddy Waters to Solomon Burke, found renewed audiences when white stars covered their songs, releasing them from the margins of the music industry. Today, music historians frame Presley's legacy within this duality of homage and exploitation. Museums and academic conferences revisit original Sun studio tapes, tracing how Elvis's vocal inflections and stage persona fused multiple traditions into something entirely new. At the same time, scholars emphasize the systemic barriers that forced black musicians into exploitation or obscurity. The lack of radio play, discriminatory booking practices, and exploitative record contracts that drained their earnings. Presley's story thus becomes a case study in American cultural appropriation. He personified the thrill of cross-pollination, the excitement when gospel phrases met blues rhythms on national television. Yet he also embodied an industry that profited from black creativity without equitable compensation or recognition. In that tension lies the dark side of his ascent, the realization that art cannot be disentangled from the power structures that shape which voices are heard and which are silenced. Ultimately, Elvis Presley's role in rock and roll history cannot be reduced to villain or hero. He was a gifted interpreter, a brilliant showman, and a cultural bridge for millions of white fans. But he was also a beneficiary of segregation, a product of an industry that commodified black artistry. Understanding this paradox sheds light on ongoing conversations about cultural appropriation, equity, and recognition in music, and reminds us that even the most electrifying performances are born in complex, often painful histories. On a humid afternoon in late June 1972, Elvis Presley sat alone in Graceland's den, the fragrant haze of incense and cigarette smoke hanging heavy in the air. A news helicopter had hovered above the mansion, its persistent rotor blades stirring the magnolia blossoms and shattering the sanctuary he so desperately craved. Already on edge from a sleepless night and hours of demanding callbacks in his home studio, Elvis snapped. He grabbed his Colt .45 pistol from the desk, stalked to the French windows overlooking the driveway, and without warning fired a single shot into the air, sending startled security scrambling for cover. In that moment, his paranoia, shaped by decades of fame, drummed up assassination scares, and a mounting cocktail of prescription sedatives, exploded into a tangible act of violence. That incident was hardly unique. Over the final 5 years of his life, Elvis's home transformed from a refuge into a battleground. He routinely paced the wood-paneled halls carrying loaded firearms, a .357 Magnum tucked into his belt, a pair of Colt pistols within arm's reach on bedside tables. Friends who visited described the constant clack of chambering rounds as he moved from room to room, rituals of self-protection that betrayed a profound anxiety. One night, after a televised rerun of JFK's assassination, Elvis lay awake for hours on the couch, muttering about the next shot coming for him, and kept his service pistol trained on the front door until dawn. Even mundane household fixtures were not safe from his escalating aggression. In 1974, frustrated by a sputtering cable feed, he walked into the living room and aimed at the television screen, emptying half a clip until a friend wrestled the gun from his hands. Another evening, enraged by a late-night party crashing Graceland's normally strict guest list, he stormed out onto the veranda and fired 3 warning shots over the heads of drunken intruders, scattering them into the manicured hedges. These episodes were recounted quietly by former Marines who served as his bodyguards. Their official logbooks noted disturbances, shots fired, and potential self-harm, but Graceland management treated the records as classified, fearing scandal. Outside the walls of his home, Elvis's reputation for impulsive violence followed him on tour. During a 1973 stop in St. Louis, he became irate when a photographer climbed onto a stool to film him rehearsing. Elvis knocked over a drum kit, snatched the man's camera, and threatened to shoot if he didn't delete every roll of film immediately. The photographer, hands shaking, complied, and the story stayed out of newspapers only because local police quietly warned the photographer against pursuing charges, citing Presley's stature and the potential uproar. Yet the most insidious threats did not come from trespassers or intrusive journalists, but from unseen extortionists. Beginning in early 1975, the FBI's Memphis field office received a steady stream of letters demanding money in exchange for silence about Presley's private life. Some writers threatened to publish lurid accounts of drug binges and secret liaisons. Others claimed to possess photographs of Presley in compromising situations. One letter, typed on a Zeppelin tour stationery, demanded $50,000 or Elvis's reputation would be forever ruined. The Bureau opened a formal investigation, File 683, but most schemes fizzled when senders failed to follow through or when the promised evidence turned out to be crudely forged. Nonetheless, the psychological toll on Presley was profound. In his private journals, seized by the FBI and later released under Freedom of Information Act requests, he sketched dark cartoons of himself bound and gagged, eyes wide with terror. By late 1976, Elvis's mental state had deteriorated to a point where violence and paranoia were indistinguishable from everyday life. He refused to perform outdoors for fear snipers would line the rooftops, insisted that bodyguards search every piece of mail for hidden powders or blades, and began carrying a Derringer in his waistband even at church services. During a rare family outing to a Memphis diner, he startled patrons by pulling a handgun whenever a stranger approached the booth. According to a waiter's affidavit, Elvis kept one finger on the trigger for the entire meal. Legal entanglements followed. In early 1977, a former girlfriend filed a restraining order after claiming Elvis had threatened her with a pistol during a volatile phone call. Although the court ultimately dismissed the petition, citing lack of jurisdiction over Presley's residency, the sensational headlines further fueled his sense of siege. At Graceland, he installed floodlights, reinforced locks, and posted guards at every gate. Even close friends found themselves buzzed through security scanners before dinner. Then came August 16, 1977. Hours before his final collapse, Presley had paced Graceland's corridors, alternately loading magazines and tossing them aside in frustration at misfiring weapons. He complained of shadows moving in the hall, voices whispering threats, and broken glass under his feet, though the nearest window was intact. When paramedics arrived, they found him slumped by the piano in the living room, no gun in hand, but countless cartridges scattered around him, silent testament to a life consumed by fear and aggression. Elvis Presley's final years stand as a grim testament to the corrosive power of unchecked violence and paranoia. Once the joyful king of rock and roll, he became a tragic figure trapped in his own fortress of bullets and barred windows, tormented as much by imagined enemies as by real ones. The FBI's extortion files, the police logs of shots fired, And the testimonies of those who lived inside Graceland's gilded walls collectively reveal a man whose greatest performance was no longer on stage, but in a relentless, solitary war against ghosts only he could see.